I was standing on the rooftop of the Ether Club, this exclusive glass box in Portland, where my wife Heather and her venture capital friends like to play pretend. I was her plus one, the rustic husband she tolerated. Her lover Julian, this smug growth strategist in an expensive suit, was laughing with her. He turned to me, his eyes gliding over me like I was the help. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a $5 casino chip, and flipped it at me. It clattered on the marble bar. "Here's a tip, barman," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'll take good care of her tonight." The next day, my cheating wife found out her key no longer fit the door, and her affair partner Julian called her screaming, "You didn't tell me your husband is—" To understand why that $5 chip felt like a bullet, you need to understand who I am. My name is Scott. I'm 47 years old, and I am the founder of Archer's Creek Distillery. I don't build strategic partnerships. I don't leverage vertical integrations. I build bourbon. I deal in things you can touch, smell, and taste. I deal with white oak from Missouri, the precise char level on the inside of a barrel, the way corn and rye and barley talk to each other in a fermentation tank. I deal in time. My entire life's work is about patience. It's about taking raw ingredients, putting them through fire and pressure, and then letting them sit in the dark for 10, 12, 15 years, trusting that something beautiful is happening when no one is watching. My hands are stained. They smell faintly of yeast and sour mash with the permanent scent of charred oak driven deep into the skin. I built my first still myself by hand from copper sheets. I built this company from a $10,000 loan and a dream everyone said was stupid. Who needs another craft bourbon, Scott? Now we're one of the most respected independent distilleries in the country. We don't make the most. We make the best. My work is substance. My wife Heather is 45. She's a partner at a venture capital firm in Portland. Her world is the exact opposite of mine. Her world is image. It's projected growth. It's disrupting markets. She doesn't build things. She finds people who say they're building things and she gives them other people's money to do it. She is brilliant. She's ambitious. Her drive is a force of nature. And for the last 5 years, she has been deeply, profoundly embarrassed by me. It wasn't always like that. When we got married, she loved what I did. She loved the romance of it. I was the artisan, the craftsman. She was the ambassador, the one who could take my quaint story and sell it to her sophisticated friends. We were a team. I was the substance, she was the style. But then, about 5 years ago, she got her partnership. She entered a new world, a world of tech bros and angel investors and people who use words like ideation without a trace of irony. And suddenly, I wasn't an artisan anymore. I was rustic. Then rustic became quaint. And quaint became a little blue collar. And then finally, I just became embarrassing. It was subtle at first. The little corrections at dinner parties. I'd be telling a story about a new MASH bill, and she'd touch my arm and say, "Scott, honey, you're getting into the weeds again." She'd sigh when I'd try to explain the angel's share to one of her tech CEO friends, as if I was the one who was boring. She, who had never touched a single grain of corn in her life, would try to explain my own bourbon to her clients. What Scott means to say, she'd interrupt, is that the terroir of the Willamette Valley really influences the finish. We're in Portland, not France. And bourbon gets its flavor from corn, new charred oak, and thyme. Not terroir. She knew that. But terroir sounded better. It sounded more expensive. It took me a long, long time to understand what was really happening. It wasn't just ambition. It was anxiety. I was reading about it one night, this psychological concept called status dissonance. It's the deep gnawing anxiety that happens when a person's projected status, the image they show the world, is completely disconnected from their actual substance. Heather had climbed into this new money world, this land of buzzwords and billion-dollar valuations for companies that had never turned a profit. She felt like an imposter, terrified that someone would find out she was just a smart woman from Oregon, not one of them. And I was her anchor to that old world. I was the walking, talking proof that she wasn't who she was pretending to be. My craft, my old world work my hands. They were a threat to her image. And so to feel secure in her new hollow world, she had to belittle mine. She had to make me small so she could feel big. And why did I take it? Why did I just smile and nod and let her do it? That's a harder question. I guess you could call it the trap of the good provider. My whole identity, my whole sense of self-worth was built on being the stable one. The rock. The man who held it all together. I was the founder, the father, the husband. I was the one who paid the mortgage. I was the one who funded her buy-in to that VC firm. I was the one who made sure the kids, Owen, Elias, Sadie, and Ruby, had everything they needed. My job as I saw it was to be the oak barrel, to be solid, to absorb the hits, the pressure, the changes in temperature, and not break. I thought my job was to hold the family together no matter what. I confused my endurance for strength. I didn't realize it was just a cage I'd built for myself. I remember one night at our house, she was hosting this big investor dinner. One of the tech guys, some 25-year-old kid in a hoodie who had just raised $50 million, asked me what I did. I started to explain the distillation process, and Heather just laughed. That tinkling silver laugh she used for parties. Oh, Scott's in his hobby phase. He runs this cute little distillery. It's very artisanal. My company. The one that had just posted a $3 million profit. The one that paid for the wine in her hand and the roof over her head. A cute little hobby. I looked at her. I saw the dismissal in her eyes, and I just smiled. I took a sip of my own bourbon and said, "Yeah, it keeps me busy." Because to argue, to correct her, to call her out, that would make a scene. It would disrupt the perfect image she was projecting. And the good provider doesn't make scenes. The good provider endures. So I let myself be erased. For years, I became her plus none. She stopped inviting me to her galas, her award dinners, her networking events. "It's just boring, Scott, you'd hate it," she'd say. Or, "It's really a partners-only thing." I was the husband who didn't fit the brand. I stayed home. I worked in the distillery. I taught my son Owen, who was 19, how to grade grain. I taught my 16-year-old twins Elias and Sadie the difference between good smoke and bad smoke. I read stories to my 13-year-old Ruby. I told myself it was a fair trade. She had her world, I had mine. I told myself that right up until the night she walked into my tasting room, her eyes bright and false, and told me she needed me to come to the Ether Club. "You have to come," she'd said. That's what started it. She walked into my distillery's tasting room about a week before the event. I was in the middle of a tasting flight with a new client explaining the notes on our 12-year reserve. Heather almost never came to the distillery. She said the smell of the sour mash gave her a headache. She stood there in a sharp, expensive dress looking completely out of place against the aging oak barrels. She waited until my client left her foot tapping impatiently. "Scott," she said, not as a greeting, but as a summons. "The Air Mid Quarterly Gala is next Tuesday, at the Ether Club. You have to come." I stopped what I was doing. I just looked at her. "I have to?" "Yes, you have to. It's important for my image. A few of the other partners are bringing their spouses, and it's starting to look weird that you're never there. It's starting to look weird. After 5 years, 5 years of being her plus none, 5 years of being the rustic husband, the cute little hobby guy, not fit for her new shiny world. And now suddenly I was a required accessory. I should have said no. I should have told her to go play with her venture capital friends and leave me to my work. But that old stupid programming kicked in. The good provider, the husband, the one who endures. "All right, Heather," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "If it's that important." "It is," she said, already turning to leave. "And Scott, please, get that suit of yours pressed and maybe get a trim. You look—" She waved her hand vaguely at me, "a little wild." That night getting ready, I felt like a prop. I felt like a draft horse being squeezed into a harness for a parade I wanted no part of. I put on my one good suit, the dark charcoal one I'd bought for a funeral 3 years ago. I combed my hair. I stood in front of the mirror and saw a man I didn't recognize. a distiller dressed up as a banker. Heather, on the other hand, was electric. She wore a red dress that was less a piece of clothing and more a statement of intent. It was designed to be seen. The Ether Club was on the 40th floor of a new glass and steel tower in the Pearl District. It was everything I hated. It was cold. It smelled like expensive perfume and ozone. The floors were polished black marble, the lights were all sharp sterile LEDs, and the art on the walls looked like someone had just thrown paint at a canvas and charged $80,000 for it. This wasn't a room for living in. It was a room for making transactions in. The place was packed with people who all looked the same, young, sharp, expensive suits or ironically casual hoodies that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. They all had the same hungry, restless eyes talking loudly about Series B funding and burn rates and disrupting things. Nobody was just talking. They were pitching. Everyone was pitching. Heather transformed. The second we walked through those doors, it was like a switch was thrown. She lit up. Her voice got higher. Her laugh became a tinkling, silvery thing that she never used at home. She moved through the crowd like a shark, touching arms, kissing cheeks, making introductions. "This is Scott," she'd say, her hand on my arm, but her eyes already looking past me to the next more important person. "He's in beverages." Beverages. I run a multi-million-dollar distillery and I'm in beverages. I just nodded. I got a glass of bourbon. Ironically, they didn't serve my brand. It wasn't trendy enough, and I stood by a floor-to-ceiling window watching the city lights, feeling like a piece of furniture. A rustic, artisanal chair someone had accidentally left in a sterile modern lobby. Then he appeared. His name was Julian. 38 years old, I found out later. He was the perfect specimen of their world. He had that expensive, razor-sharp haircut. His suit was Italian tailored so perfectly it looked like it was sewn onto him. He had a 1,000-watt smile, and he radiated that effortless, toxic confidence of a man who has never once in his life had to change his own oil. He was a growth strategist at some tech firm. Heather's entire body language changed when she saw him. She didn't just light up, she ignited. Julian, she squealed, and she actually squealed. She hugged him. It was a long hug, too long. "Heather, my God," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "You look transcendent. That dress is a public service." "Oh, stop," she said, blushing. He turned his perfect smile to me. "And you must be the husband," he said like I was a minor character in a play he'd read the reviews for. He shook my hand. His was soft manicured. Mine felt like a piece of sandpaper. "Scott," I said, "I'm in beverages." Right, he said, his attention already snapping back to Heather. For the next 30 minutes, I ceased to exist. They were in their own world. They were whispering, laughing at inside jokes. His hand was on her back, then her arm. They were talking about some project, some vertical. They were synergizing. I just stood there, this silent, bearded prop, sipping my drink and watching my wife fall in love with someone else right in front of my face. And I let them, because I was the good provider, the oak barrel. I endured. Finally, they gathered at a small, high-top table with a few of her other colleagues. I was standing there silent, just waiting for the moment I could go home. Julian was telling some story, and the table was laughing. Heather was looking at him with eyes I hadn't seen her use on me in a decade. That's when Julian looked at me. He smiled, that 1,000-watt smile. "Scott, my man," he said, his voice booming just a little too loud. "You've been quiet all night. Let me get you another drink. What are you?" "The barman." The table chuckled. Heather smiled a tight, embarrassed little smile. "I'm good," I said, my voice flat. No, I insist," he said. He reached into his pocket, not his wallet, but his suit pocket, like he was digging for lint. He pulled something out. He looked at it, then at me. He leaned across the table, and he flipped a $5 casino chip at me. It hit my suit jacket and clattered onto the marble table. A red $5 chip. "Here's a tip, barman," he said. His voice was all charm, but his eyes were pure ice. I'll take good care of her tonight." The world went silent. I heard the chip spin. I heard the sharp inhale of the woman next to me. And then I heard the laughter. Her colleagues, these polished, empty people, they roared. They thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And then I heard Heather. It wasn't a full laugh. It was a tinkle, a nervous, silvery, high-pitched tinkle. She laughed. She put her hand up to her mouth, her eyes sparkling at Julian, and she laughed. That was the moment the oak barrel cracked. That was the moment the good provider died. The rage I expected, the hot white flash anger, it didn't come. Something else did. It was cold. It was calm. It was the feeling I get right before I make the cut on a new barrel, that moment of absolute precision. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was an audit. This wasn't a humiliation. It was an invoice. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I slowly reached out and picked up the $5 chip from the table. It was heavy in my hand. I looked at George Washington's face on it. Then I looked up past the laughing colleagues and I locked eyes with Julian. His smile was just starting to falter, confused that I wasn't screaming or crying. I held up the chip. "Thanks," I said. My voice was perfectly calm. So calm, it cut through the laughter and silenced the table. "That's the down payment," I said, "on the lesson you're about to learn." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't look at Heather. I didn't say goodbye. I slid the chip into my suit pocket, turned my back on all of them, and walked out of the Ether Club. I walked past the minimalist art and the marble floors and the men who disrupt the world. And as I stepped into the elevator, the chip felt like a piece of iron in my pocket, burning a hole straight through the fabric. I drove home from the Ether Club, but I didn't go inside. The house felt wrong, tainted. Instead, I went to the distillery, my sanctuary. I sat there in the dark in my office that overlooks the Rick House. The smell of aging bourbon, of oak and char and thyme, usually calmed me. Tonight, it just made me think. My entire life was about turning raw, harsh ingredients into something refined and valuable. It was about patience. It was about substance. And I had married image. I had married a hollow, beautiful barrel with nothing inside. I wasn't angry. That was the strange part. The humiliation at the party, the laughter, the chip, it had burned away all the hot, messy emotions. I wasn't sad. I wasn't heartbroken. I was just clear. The good provider had finally clocked out. The accountant had just punched in. I sat in my chair, the $5 chip cold in my hand, and I waited. Heather didn't come home. Midnight came and went. 1 a.m. I tried calling her twice, straight to voicemail. Of course, she was either too busy or she had turned her phone off. Both answers meant the same thing. At 2:15 a.m., my phone buzzed on the desk. A notification from my bank. Credit card alert. A charge for $550. The merchant, the hotel connected to the Ether Club. The time, 2:14 a.m. $550 for an upgraded suite. Not just a room to crash in. A suite. Apparently, when you're betraying your husband, you do it with a city view. I took a screenshot. I emailed it to myself. I saved it to a new folder on my laptop. The folder was labeled Liabilities. The rage I'd been waiting for still didn't come. It was just confirmation. The books were finally being balanced. I felt the last thread of our 20-year marriage snap. It didn't make a loud noise. It was just a quiet, clean little snip. I didn't sleep. I just watched the sun come up over the creek, turning the sky a sick, grayish pink. I went home around 6 a.m. I was in the kitchen making the darkest, strongest coffee I could when I heard her car pull into the driveway. She crept in through the garage door, trying to be quiet, like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. I didn't turn around. I just listened to her footsteps on the hardwood. "Scott," she said, her voice trying to sound casual. "You're up early." I turned, leaning back against the counter, holding my coffee mug. And I just looked at her. She was wearing yesterday's red dress. Her makeup was smeared, and she was wearing a man's suit jacket. An expensive one, charcoal gray. It was huge on her. And right there on the cuff was a small, tasteful, embroidered monogram. A single letter J. She smelled like stale cocktails and him. that expensive sharp cologne he'd been wearing. Never went to sleep, I said. My voice was flat, dead. She tried to laugh, this nervous bird-like sound. Oh my God, the party just went on forever. Julian and a few of the partners, we just kept brainstorming. We were on a roll. I must have crashed on a sofa in someone's suite. She gestured to the jacket as if it was a piece of evidence for her story. Julian lent me this. It was freezing. Right, I said. Brainstorming at 2 a.m. in a hotel. You must have been very productive. We were... She said, her chin lifting in that defiant way she had when she was lying. She walked past me to the coffee pot, her back to me. You wouldn't understand, Scott. It's just the energy when you're closing a big deal. Then I saw it. Just above the collar of that expensive jacket on the side of her neck. A dark, ugly, purple-red mark. He'd branded her, like a stray. My voice was perfectly level. You've got something on your neck. Her hand flew up to cover it, her eyes wide with panic. What? Oh, it's... I must have burned myself with the curling iron. You know how clumsy I am. The curling iron. She was going with the curling iron. I had been married to this woman for 20 years. I had watched her get ready for parties, for work, for galas thousands of times. She could apply mascara in a moving car. She was anything but clumsy. And that was not a burn. That was the last lie I would ever listen to. I just nodded, slowly. The curling iron, right, of course. She kept her hand on her neck, desperately trying to pull the brainstorming story back together. Anyway, I'm exhausted. I'm going to grab a shower. You do that, I said. She walked out of the kitchen. I watched her go. I listened to her footsteps on the stairs. I heard the shower turn on. I took out my phone. She left an hour later, around 10 a.m., for what she called a yoga class and brunch with the girls, trying to pretend everything was normal. The second her car was out of the driveway, my phone was back out. Yes, I need a locksmith at this address immediately, I said. Every exterior door, top of the line. I'm paying for an emergency call-out. The locksmith was there in 30 minutes. By 10:30, every single lock on my house was new. The old tumblers and bolts sat in a sad little pile on the porch. I picked one up. It was amazing. One small, cheap piece of metal is the only thing that separates home from not your house anymore. I paid the man in cash, gave my son Owen, who was home from college, his new key with strict instructions, and waited. She came home at 4 p.m. I was in the living room reading a book. I heard the car door slam. I heard her expensive heels click on the stone walkway. Then I heard the sound of a key sliding into a lock and stopping. Silence. Then the jiggle. A frustrated, angry jiggle. Then a different key. More jiggling. Scott! She yelled through the door. Scott, the key isn't working. Did you break the lock? I waited. Scott! She banged on the door. Open this door. This is ridiculous. I calmly folded the corner of my page, put my book down, and walked to the door. I opened it. She was standing there, flushed and furious, her yoga mat under her arm. My key! She said, holding it up like it had personally betrayed her. It's not working. I know, I said. I leaned against the doorframe, making sure to block the entrance. It's a security upgrade. A what without telling me what the hell, Scott? She tried to push past me. I didn't move. I'm a man who moves 300-pound barrels of bourbon for a living. She didn't stand a chance. It's to keep things out. I said, my voice quiet. That don't belong here. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? Let me in. This is my house, too. Is it? I said. I pulled out my phone and held it up, showing her the screenshot. The $550 charge. 2:15 a.m., Heather. That's some expensive brainstorming. Or was that just the room? Did the curling iron cost extra? Her jaw dropped. This isn't your house anymore, I said. I could see our neighbor, old Mrs. Henderson, suddenly pretending to be fascinated by her dead rose bushes. I think you need to go back to Julian's. You left his jacket. You can't do this! She shrieked, the mask of the VC partner falling away, revealing the spoiled, panicked woman underneath. I just did, I said, and I closed the door, sliding the new heavy, beautiful deadbolt into place. The click it made was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. I didn't even let the sound of the deadbolt echo. I was already dialing. My lawyer, Keith, picked up on the second ring. His voice was always calm, always steady. "Scott," he said as a greeting. "Keith, it's Scott," I said. My voice was just as calm, clinical. "She did it. I need you to file, and I need the best forensic accountant you know. I want to know everything." There was a half-second pause, the only sound the faint hiss of the line. "I'll have her in my office tomorrow at 9, he said. "Just bring your laptop." The next morning, I walked into Keith's conference room. It was all dark wood and expensive leather, a room designed to intimidate. Sitting next to Keith was a woman in her late 30s named Paige. She wore sharp rectangular glasses and had an expression that suggested she found most of the human race to be sloppy and predictable. She looked like she ate spreadsheets for breakfast and calculated tax fraud for fun. "Scott, this is Paige," Keith said. "She's the best." Paige didn't smile. She just nodded, her eyes already locked on the laptop I was setting on the table. "Mr. Archer, Keith tells me you have a commingled accounts problem." "Call me Scott," I said. "And yeah, you could say that. My wife Heather is an authorized user on my business Amex. She's a VC, so I put her on it years ago for client dinners and entertainment." A tiny, dangerous smile played on Paige's lips. "Oh," she said, cracking her knuckles over her keyboard as I gave her the logins. "I love it when they use the business account. The paper trail is so much cleaner." For 20 minutes, the only sound in that expensive, quiet office was the click, click, click of her fingers flying across the keys. It was a terrifying, beautiful sound. Keith and I just sat there drinking coffee, watching a surgeon at work. Finally, Paige stopped. She took off her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose, and looked at me. "Scott," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "In the last 6 months, your wife has charged $85,000 in client dinners to your business card, unless her clients are demanding private jet rentals to Napa spa weekends, and let me check this. $5,000 at a designer boutique in one afternoon. I'd say you have a significant reporting discrepancy." I just nodded. The anger wasn't hot. It was just a cold, hard number. $85,000. The good provider had been funding a lifestyle I wasn't even invited to. "But that's not the interesting part," Paige said, turning her laptop screen toward me. "That's just spousal theft. This is conspiracy." She pointed to a different set of transactions. Wire transfers. Moving from our joint personal account, the one I funded with distillery profits, to a single holding company. $10,000 here. $25,000 there. Small enough to fly under the radar, all adding up. $150,000, she said, all funneled into a single shell LLC, registered 3 months ago. "What is it?" Keith asked, leaning in. Paige typed, her fingers a blur. "It's called Apex Beverage AI. They're building a software platform, an AI-driven brand accelerator for the craft beverage market." My blood went cold. I felt the air leave my lungs. "A rival company," I said. The words tasted like ash. "She was using my money to build a rival company." "Worse," Paige said, pulling up another screen. "Based on their pitch deck, they're building a company designed to make your own distribution methods obsolete. She wasn't just leaving you. She was planning to gut your business on her way out." I sat back, the scale of the betrayal settling on me. It was breathtaking. The affair, the lies, the $5 chip, that was just the appetizer. This was the main course. Then a thought small and sharp cut through the fog. "This Julian guy," I said, my voice quiet. "The growth strategist. Where does he work?" Keith shrugged. "Some tech firm, you said." "Yeah, that's what she always said." I looked at Paige. "I own a subsidiary, a logistics and marketing company called Cascade Beverage Solutions. Heather always dismissed it. She called it that tiny trucking company you bought. It handles distribution and marketing for dozens of craft brands." My heart was hammering. I knew the answer before I asked the question. "Paige, I said, my voice shaking just once. Pull the employee roster for Cascade. Her fingers flew. The file opened. Payroll. And there it was. Julian. Head of Marketing, Cascade Beverage Solutions. Salary $180,000. The man who flipped me a $5 chip, who called me a barman who was sleeping with my wife and robbing me blind. He cashed a paycheck with my name on it. I didn't get angry. I didn't yell. I just started to laugh. It was a cold, quiet, terrible sound. Scott, Keith asked, looking concerned. I pointed at the screen. That man works for me. I said, the laughter turning into a wide, chilling smile. He reports to me. This wasn't a divorce anymore. This was an audit, and I was about to do some accounting. That discovery changed everything. The rage was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was a cold, quiet focus. This was no longer a divorce. It was a hostile takeover. And I was about to liquidate two very toxic assets. The next morning, I called a mandatory strategic review at the offices of Cascade Beverage Solutions, my subsidiary. I told them I was the owner of the parent company, Archer's Creek Holdings, and I was coming in to review the new marketing initiatives. I got there at 10 a.m. I walked into the big glass conference room, the one with the panoramic view of Portland. I took the seat at the head of the table. The other division heads filed in looking nervous. They didn't know me. I was just a name on an org chart they'd probably never looked at. Then at 9:59, Julian walked in. He was all confidence, radiating that expensive growth strategist energy. He was wearing another impeccable suit, carrying a leather portfolio, smiling and chatting with a colleague. Then he looked to the head of the table, and he saw me. The barman. His tan vanished. I watched the blood literally drain from his face. He froze, his mouth half open. The colleague he was talking to looked at him confused. Julian just stood there, his brain visibly crashing as it tried to reconcile the man from the party with the man sitting in the CEO chair. Julian, I said, my voice calm and friendly. Glad you could make it. Please sit. He moved like a robot, his legs stiff. He fumbled with his portfolio, dropping a pen. He sat down 3 chairs away from me and tried to look composed. But I could see the sweat on his forehead. I let him sweat. For 45 minutes, I let him stew in his own panic. I sat through their presentations. I listened to a woman from logistics talk about freight costs. I listened to a guy from operations talk about warehouse efficiency. Then it was Julian's turn. He stood up his hands, shaking so slightly only I would notice. He tried to turn on that 1,000-watt smile, but it was a flickering, dying bulb. He began his presentation on synergy and new market verticals. He was actually presenting the framework for Apex Beverage AI, but disguised as a new internal strategy. He was pitching his plan to rob me to me. The arrogance was breathtaking. He finished, his voice cracking only once. He looked at me desperate. So, Scott, any thoughts on our new projections? I smiled. Just one, Julian, I said. The room was silent. I reached into my jacket pocket, the one he'd seen me in at the Ether Club. I pulled out the small red $5 casino chip. I held it up for a moment, letting it catch the light. Then I slid it slowly across the polished mahogany table. It spun and spun and spun, making a soft shushing sound before it came to a perfect wobbling stop right in front of his expensive leather portfolio. Julian stared at the chip like it was a live grenade. I believe, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of that room, this is yours. He looked up, his eyes wide with pure terror. I don't understand, he whispered. You don't? I asked, feigning surprise. It's your severance. I stood up. Julian, you're fired, effective immediately, for conduct unbecoming of an executive, for conspiracy to defraud the parent company, for misuse of company funds, and just personally for sleeping with my wife. The room inhaled. It was a single unified gasp. Julian just sat there, frozen, his face the color of old newspaper. You can't, he stammered. I just did, I said. Oh, and Julian. I paused halfway to the door. That $180,000 salary, that was me. You threw a $5 chip at the man who signs your paychecks. That's not just bad strategy, that's catastrophic math. I walked out, leaving him to be escorted out by security. The second climax, well, that was quieter, but so much more satisfying. The court hearing was 2 weeks later. It was exactly what you'd expect. Heather and her lawyer, some shark who probably cost a fortune, were on one side. I was on the other with Keith. Heather was playing the part of the wronged wife to perfection. She wore a conservative high-necked navy dress. Her makeup was minimal, designed to make her look tired, brave, and victimized. She wouldn't even look at me. Her lawyer gave his big speech. He painted a picture of me as a controlling, emotionally distant husband, obsessed with my rustic hobby. He painted Heather as the neglected wife who had sacrificed her own ambitions to support my passion project. He claimed I was vindictive, that I had locked her out of her own home out of spite. He was demanding the house half of my business, Archer's Creek, and all its subsidiaries and massive spousal support. He sat down, looking very proud of himself. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, looked at my lawyer. "Keith, do you have a response to these allegations?" Keith stood up. He wasn't a shark. He was a fisherman, patient, methodical. He was holding a single thin folder. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm. "We do. My client isn't here to argue about feelings. He's here to present facts." And he did. He calmly presented the bank statements. The $85,000 in fraudulent charges on my business Amex, the hotels, the spa weekends, the $5,000 shopping sprees. Heather's lawyer objected. "Those were legitimate business development expenses." "Really?" Keith asked, not missing a beat. "Then perhaps you can explain these." He presented the wire transfers. The $150,000 siphoned from their joint account and funneled directly into a shell LLC. He presented the articles of incorporation for Apex Beverage AI. He presented the company's pitch deck, which outlined a direct plan to disrupt and outmode my own subsidiary's business model. And then the kill shot. And finally, Your Honor. Keith said, "We have the employment contract for the CEO of this new rival company, a Mr. Julian, who it turns out was concurrently employed as the head of marketing at my client's own subsidiary Cascade Beverage Solutions." The courtroom got very quiet. Heather's lawyer just sat there, his mouth open. He looked at Heather, who was no longer the brave victim. She was just a woman in a navy dress exposed. The judge slowly took off her glasses. She looked at Heather. "Mrs. Archer," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "you stole $150,000 from your husband. You used it to fund a rival company. And you did it with an employee your husband was paying a $180,000 salary. And you are in this courtroom, asking him for support." Heather just sat there mute. She was broken. The judgment was beautiful. It was a work of art. It was a clean, precise cut. I was awarded the house, free and clear. I was awarded 100% of my business, Archer's Creek, and all its subsidiaries, including Cascade. I was awarded full legal custody of my kids, Owen, Elias, Sadie, and Ruby. Heather was ordered to repay the $150,000 she stole. And as for her assets, the judge looked at the list. "Mrs. Archer," she said, "you will retain your personal belongings and your 2010 Subaru Outback." I heard a sound from the back row of the courtroom. It was my son, Owen. He was trying to stifle a laugh, and it came out as a loud, strangled cough. I looked at Heather. The new money polish had cracked and shattered, and there was absolutely nothing left underneath. She was just empty. News like that travels fast, especially in a city like Portland, which pretends to be all about craft and community, but loves new money gossip more than anything. The story of the barman who actually owned the company and fired his wife's lover with a $5 casino chip that was apparently legend status. My distillery, Archer's Creek, blew up. I mean, it exploded. The phone didn't stop ringing. We had a 6-month waiting list for our 12-year reserve, and it became 12 months overnight. Orders tripled. It turned out that authenticity wasn't just good for bourbon, it was incredible for marketing. I created a new bourbon, an ultra-premium 15-year reserve. I built it from a few lost barrels I'd been aging in the back of the rickhouse barrels I'd been saving for something special. I designed a new bottle, heavy and dark, and a custom wooden box. I called it the $5 bet, and on the side of that beautiful wooden box I had a small custom brass plaque engraved with 5 words, "Authenticity is non-negotiable." We sold out of the entire first run in 24 hours. My kids, Owen, Elias, Sadie, and Ruby, are thriving. They're good kids. They saw the ugliness, but they also saw it get cleaned up. They saw that you don't have to live with lies. Owen is working with me at the distillery, learning the craft, and he's got a natural talent for it. The house is loud again, filled with their arguments about video games and music, and it's the best sound in the world. It's a home built on honesty, not image. People asked me why I didn't try to work it out, why I went straight for the kill. They didn't understand. This wasn't a marriage with a crack in it. This was a cancer. You don't negotiate with cancer. You don't try to save the part that's rotten, hoping it won't spread. You make the clean, precise cut. It's not about revenge, it's an amputation. It's the only way you can save what's still healthy. That $5 casino chip, it's framed. It sits on my desk in the distillery right next to my first ever bottling. It's not a reminder of an insult. It's a receipt. The price I paid to get my life back. And every morning I look at it and I'm reminded that substance always beats style. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.